Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Also, welcome to another episode of Monsters 101, where we look at and study the monsters of horror, taking a look at the villains, ghosts, demons and creatures that haunt the screen. For this episode, we're looking at The Thing, the antagonist of both John Carpenter's 1982 The Thing and the 2011 prequel, well, also called The Thing. I am aware that it is also in the 2002 The Thing video game, but as I haven't played that, I won't be including it in this episode. I will, however, be including the deleted original finale of the 2011 prequel in the Origins section, but honestly, it's up to you guys if you consider that bit canon. The Thing is a hostile extraterrestrial organism which has the ability to assimilate and perfectly replicate its prey. It crashed to Earth approximately 100,000 years ago and was frozen in the Antarctica ice until the 1980s when the crew of a Norwegian research station discovered it and removed it from the ice. In The Thing organism stalks and attacks the crew of the Thor research station and subsequently the crew of the American National Science Institute, Station 4. The Thing 1982 is based on the novella Who Goes There, written by John W. Campbell in 1938. The film project went through multiple writers and directors until eventually Bill Lancaster wrote the final screenplay, after 4 drafts that is, and John Carpenter came on board to direct. John Carpenter was originally reluctant to join the project as he was a fan of the original adaptation of the novella, the 1951's The Thing from Another World, and felt it would be difficult to improve upon. However, after he was encouraged to read the original novella, he changed his mind. Carpenter felt there were interesting similarities between the novella and Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, which also involves a group of people stranded in one location and which invokes themes of paranoia and mistrust. He apparently also felt that the novella's story was, quote, timely, meaning he could adapt it for his day. The design for the film's antagonist, the Thing organism, was for the most part created and designed by special makeup effect artist Rob Bottin. Bottin had previously worked with Carpenter on The Fog and would go on to work on Piranha, RoboCop, Seven and Game of Thrones, to name a few. While nearly every creature design was created by Bottin, the kennel dog Thing design was partially done by Stan Winston of Jurassic Park fame. And while Bill Lancaster's script originally had the Thing organism hidden in the shadows for most of the film, Bottin convinced them to make it far more visible to have a bigger effect on the audience, which they did, and it did. When approaching the design of the Thing's different forms, Bottin approached it as if the Thing had travelled all over the galaxy and had assimilated multiple different alien creatures, allowing it to build a catalogue of different physical features that it could draw upon when moving or attacking. According to the deleted finale of the 2011 prequel, the Thing organism isn't the only life form to have fallen to Earth. A scientific crew of alien life forms, known only as the pilots, travelled from planet to planet studying and collecting different life forms, which they would store in research pods on their ship. Unfortunately, the pilots captured the Thing organism on one planet disguised as another alien life form. The organism then proceeded to break free and attack and assimilate the other aliens on the spacecraft. The last surviving pilot decided to crash the spacecraft into planet Earth with the hopes of destroying the Thing organism in the process. However, the organism survived and assimilated the surviving pilot. The Thing organism then broke free of the spacecraft but froze meters away and was encased in the Antarctica ice for the next 100,000 years. A distress signal was triggered by either the surviving pilot or by the Thing organism when it left the craft. And 100,000 years later, both the craft and the organism are discovered by the Norwegian crew of the Thor Geological Research Station in the winter of 1982. The crew, having picked up the distress signal, excavate the Thing organism and transport it back to the station encased in a block of ice. How long have you got? The original form and appearance of the thing organism is not known. The thing organism is a type of parasitic life form whose appearance and anatomy changes based on the life forms it assimilates and replicates. By assimilating and replicating the life forms that are indigenous to the planet, it allows the thing organism to both adapt and survive in any environment. The thing organism is an interesting life form as it simultaneously exists as both a single, complete being, while each individual piece is also an independent creature. While the thing organism assimilates and replicates life forms to hide in and to survive, it does change its form when attacking and protecting itself. And in these moments, the organism takes on many varied forms. It calls upon different biological and cellular structures that it has previously assimilated, such as insect-like legs with wiry hair, tentacles, lots of teeth, mouths, scorpion-like pincers, faces, and limbs. The thing organism, when attacking, often creates a mouth similar to that of the xenomorph seen in Alien. It creates a mouth which opens and then contains an extendable smaller mouth which can reach out, grab the prey, and pull it back into the thing. Forms that we are aware of are the original thing, which is excavated from the ice and we know was 6 by 12 feet and 3.5 feet high. The dog thing, the blood test thing, the kennel thing, and many, many, many human things. Whichever form the thing organism is in, it always showcases incredible strength and very often speed. In the 1982 The Thing, biologist Blair describes the thing organism as, quote, an organism that imitates other life forms, and it imitates them perfectly. When it attacked our dogs, it tried to digest them, absorb them, and in the process shape its own cells to imitate them, end quote. Like other monsters, the thing organism does hunt prey, and while it doesn't hunt for fun or to eat, it is hunting for survival and self-preservation. But unlike other monsters, the thing organism hunts and kills in a very distinct way. It both assimilates and perfectly replicates its prey. As the thing organism is a shape-shifting chameleon, it allows it to blend into any surrounding and come in close proximity to its target without being initially suspected. The thing organism prefers to hunt in the dark and in places where the target is isolated. This allows the organism time to change form, attack, assimilate, and replicate the target completely. When the thing organism attacks, it attacks in approximately 4 different ways, and in each way it changes its form and size in a shocking and often gruesome way. The reason for the change in form is to open a variety of ways to attack, grab, and penetrate the target. So, while it was hiding in a dog or human form, it now almost peels off that exterior hiding place to reveal more insectoid and animalistic features such as tentacles that extend and grab hold of the target and pull it back into itself, usually into a large mouth filled with many teeth. As well as tentacles, the organism also uses an extendable mouth to reach out and grab hold of and attack the target. The first way the thing organism attacks is by penetrating layers of skin and muscle of its prey and implanting its own cells within them, which then attack and absorb the cells of the prey. Consider when the Blair thing attacks Gary in the finale of the original. The cells are then copied by the thing's cells until there is nothing human remaining, only the perfect replica of the human or of whatever it is it attacked. The replica is now another separate organism, hiding inside the shell of the prey, but which now has the cellular shape-shifting abilities of the organism. The second way it attacks is when the organism uses its tentacles or extendable mouth to pull the prey or target into itself. When doing this, the thing organism often leaves traces of the attack, such as pools of blood. Consider in the 2011 remake when it attacks the dog and Hendrix. The bodies of the prey are cut by the mouth's teeth as they are being consumed, which then spills the prey's blood. Once the prey is inside of the thing organism, it is encased in some sort of amniotic sac. An amniotic sac is a thin-walled sac that surrounds a fetus during pregnancy. In the 2011 prequel, when they do an autopsy on the thing organism that had attacked Hendrix, they notice that the tissue on Hendrix is almost new, as though the thing is absorbing him as a form of digestion. In this instance, the prey, human or dog, is absorbed, and the thing organism then takes on the form and anatomy of the prey. In the 2011 prequel, Dr. Kate Lloyd takes a tissue sample from Hendrix and sees that the alien cells are attacking Hendrix cells and then copying them. Kate says, quote, "It attacks its prey, copies it perfectly, and hides inside it waiting," end quote. An extension to this second way of attacking is that the thing organism sometimes secretes a greenish liquid at its prey. It isn't clear why this is always used, but in this instance, it is used when the thing organism is attacking multiple dogs at once. The liquid appears to begin dissolving the dog or melting its fur off. The thing organism then uses a tentacle to grab the dog and consume it. Perhaps we can infer that this liquid is used to prevent the dog from moving, either running away or attacking. It then begins to dissolve the prey while the thing organism attacks another prey, returning to the former later. Both of these types of attack are usually done with patience and an ideal environment, usually when the prey is on their own and vulnerable. Consider Bennings in the original when he is left alone in the storeroom with the charred remains of the malformed humanoid thing. However, there isn't always an ideal environment to assimilate, and often the thing organism finds itself in combat and assimilates as a form of defense. In these instances, the thing organism again changes its form, shape and size, calling on limbs and features of previously assimilated life forms, which will help in combat. What the organism can also do is add people or creatures to its already existing mass by simply absorbing it into its own flesh. They must be in close proximity to do this, but with its strength it does have the ability to overpower its prey. And by doing this, the thing organism is adding to and improving its size and ability to fight back. When the thing organism attacks its prey, it will, if able to, remove the prey's fur or clothing, as this slows and hinders the replication process. We also know from the 2011 prequel that the thing organism is unable to replicate non-organic matter such as metal. We see this when Kate discovers metal fillings on the bathroom floor, and when they do an autopsy on the thing which attacked Hendrix, they discover a titanium plate inside of the thing organism. This had been in Hendrix's arm after he broke it and had it reset. As it can't replicate it, the thing organism just discards it. As the thing organism is able to convincingly pass as the original person or animal, we can infer that the organism, when it replicates, is able to maintain the memories and knowledge of the prey. We also know that the organism takes on any pre-existing health conditions of its prey, evidenced when the Norris thing suffers a heart attack in the original. It's also worth noting that by assimilating and replicating, this is also how the thing organism reproduces. There isn't always just one singular thing organism at one time. We often see multiple moving around both research stations. It appears the aim of the thing organism is to assimilate all living life forms it comes into contact with. It is unclear as to, once a human or creature is replicated, whether or not it is aware that it is a thing organism. However, based off of pieces of evidence found with some of the thing's behaviour, I believe that they are aware. Consider the fact that the dog thing seemed to watch and observe as it wandered around the base. Also consider how in the original the blood was sabotaged when they had suggested doing a blood test to identify thing organisms. The thing organisms are conscious and sentient. They fear discovery and plan actions which will keep their identity hidden, such as cleaning up the pool of blood found by Dr. Kate in the shower in 2011 prequel. They can also be calculating and deceptive. Consider the scene, again in the prequel, where the Juliet thing places suspicion on someone else before luring Kate into a room on her own, where it then tries to attack her. I've mentioned a few times through the episode that the thing organism is driven by self-preservation. It's why the organism attacks to assimilate, it's why it tries to keep its identity hidden, and it's why it attacks in self-defense. One such defense mechanism comes from the aforementioned duality of the thing organism, it being both a single complete being while each individual piece is also an independent creature. Because of this, while one part of the thing organism is being attacked, another part will separate itself from the current form. We see evidence of this when the Norris Thing's head detaches and sprouts spider-like legs and escapes. The Thing organism posing as a human or multiple humans causes mistrust and paranoia between the remaining survivors. This stems from them being unable to be sure who is human and who is a thing. We see this in Blair in the original. His worry at the damage the Thing organism can do turns him paranoid and dangerous as he begins to destroy radios and vehicles around the base, wanting to prevent the Thing from getting out. We also see it when Mac is recording a log and says,
"Nobody trusts anybody now. We're all very tired."
We see that this can be an intentional action by the Thing organism, as witnessed with the Juliet Thing, but it is also just a side effect of the isolated and stressful environment that the survivors find themselves in. But the mistrust and paranoia also wears down the Thing organism's prey, making them vulnerable and weaker as they begin to turn on one another. As Max says, quote, "This Thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies, no one left to kill it, and then it's won." End quote. The Thing organism is a life form that has perfected its way of surviving and evolving. Its sole drive appears to be that of self-preservation, which in turn makes it incredibly hard to defeat and destroy. Ice and freezing cold temperatures don't kill it. Instead, it puts it into a deep hibernation-style sleep, where it can wait until it is freed again. As each individual piece of the Thing organism is a separate creature, being shot or having sections cut off it also doesn't kill it. As we've mentioned, the Thing organism will simply separate a piece off as a way of surviving. Fire does have a damaging effect. It can destroy and kill the outer aspect of the Thing and the replica. However, it doesn't destroy or kill the Thing on a cellular level. We see that tissue and organs often remain undamaged inside, and the cells of the Thing organism are self-aware enough to attack someone or something when they're left alone with the charred, burnt organism, as we saw with Bennings, thus allowing the Thing organism to yet again endure. The Thing also has the ability to reconstruct itself during combat and after damage is caused to it, again making it near impossible to destroy. However, there are things you can do to slow down the Thing's ability to reform. In the original film, we see Mac and the team burn the Thing organisms and then bury them in the icy snow. But to be honest, the most effective way seems to be to just blow the organism up. There are steps you can take in order to locate or weed out one of the Thing organisms. Consider the fact that the organisms can't replicate non-organic material. One way you can separate real from replica is to look for the presence of metal, such as teeth fillings or earrings. Seeing as how the Thing organism attacks on a cellular level, one small particle is enough to take over an entire organism. And because of this, in the original 1982 film, Fuchs suggests to Mac that everyone should prepare their own meals as a way to keep themselves safe. Another way to separate real from replica is to conduct a blood test, such as the one utilised by Mac in the original. Realising the Thing organism is driven by self-preservation, Mac comes up with the idea to draw blood from everyone and place it in a petri dish. He then heats a metal needle and pokes the blood with it. His thinking being that a human's blood won't react, but a Thing's blood would react in self-defence. Mac says, quote, "You see, when a man bleeds, it's just tissue. But blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked. It'll try and survive, crawl away from the hot needle." End quote. Well, thank you guys for attending Monsters 101. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. As always, let me know your thoughts on this week's monster down below. What are your thoughts on the Thing? It's certainly the most complex and confusing monster I've covered so far, and I'm not even sure that I've remembered everything. This episode could have been so much longer based on the information, but I wanted to whittle it down to a more consumable size. For my next episode, again, I'm contemplating doing a deep dive of the original 1982 The Thing. They just work well as complementary episodes when I can do the monster and the deep dive. However, it depends on you guys if you want it or not. If not a deep dive, then potentially it'll be a truly horror. But either way, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on it. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye, guys.